The most expensive consumer graphics card Nvidia has ever made just became very hard to justify buying. The RTX 5090 sat at the top of the market with total confidence for months. Nobody was close to it. Nobody was threatening it. Buyers who wanted the absolute best gaming experience opened their wallets and paid $2,000, because that was simply the price of being at the top. Nvidia knew this, and they were comfortable with it. But comfort in business rarely lasts forever when smart engineers are working on something new in a different part of the world. The Bolt Zeus GPU has arrived. It is 5 times faster than the RTX 5090 in the most demanding tests. It costs half the price. And the RTX 5090 will never look the same again. This is not a small upgrade story. This is not the kind of article where a new card edges out the previous champion by 10 or 15%, and reviewers debate whether the improvement justifies the price. This is a completely different category of event. The kind of event that happens rarely in the technology world, but when it does, it resets every expectation and forces everyone to rethink everything they thought they knew about what was possible. 5 times faster, half the price. Those two facts together represent a shift in the graphics card market that is genuinely historic, and understanding why it happened and what it means for you is worth taking the time to do properly. The RTX 5090 was a real achievement when it launched. Nvidia's engineers worked hard on it and produced something genuinely impressive. It was the fastest consumer GPU that had ever existed. It could run every game at the highest settings. It handled the most demanding visual effects with a smoothness that no other card could match. The $2,000 price was steep, but buyers who could afford it were getting something that had no equal anywhere. That is what made it worth the money. Being the only option at a certain performance level is its own justification for the price. The moment something better and cheaper exists, that justification disappears completely. To really understand the size of what just happened, you need to understand where Nvidia has been taking the graphics card market over the past several years, and why so many gamers had been frustrated even before the Zeus arrived. Nvidia has been the dominant force in consumer graphics for a very long time. Their cards have generally been the fastest, their software has been the most mature, and their relationships with game developers have made their hardware work best in the biggest titles. These are all genuine advantages, and they deserve to be acknowledged honestly. Nvidia earned their position through real engineering work and real investment, but dominance without competition tends to produce certain behaviors in companies. Prices rise because buyers have nowhere else to go. Feature limitations appear that seem designed to push buyers toward more expensive models rather than to solve real technical problems. Marketing numbers get presented in ways that emphasize the most favorable comparisons while making less favorable ones harder to find. Nvidia showed signs of all of these tendencies over their recent product generations. The RTX 4060 Ti launching with 8GB of VRAM when games were already pushing toward that limit was not a technical necessity. It was a market segmentation decision. Putting a higher memory version at a higher price was not about solving a manufacturing challenge. It was about creating a reason for buyers who needed more memory to spend more money. The RTX 5060 Ti arriving with 12GB in a world where path tracing and high-resolution gaming regularly exceed that amount told the same story. Nvidia was managing their product stack to maximize revenue rather than to give buyers the best possible product at each price point. The RTX 5090 at $2,000 was the ultimate expression of this approach. It was priced at the absolute ceiling of what the market could bear for consumer hardware, and it was there because Nvidia could put it there. No competitor existed to challenge that pricing. An alternative gave buyers a reason to look elsewhere. So $2,000 it was, and millions of people who wanted the best either paid it or accepted something less capable. The Bolt Zeus did not just bring a faster card. It brought accountability to a market that had been operating without it. Bolt graphics came from outside the traditional gaming graphics world, and that outside perspective turns out to be one of the key reasons they were able to do what established players could not. Bolt spent years building computing chips for artificial intelligence companies. These are organizations that run enormous numbers of chips simultaneously and that care deeply about 2 things above all else: raw performance and energy efficiency. When you are running a data center with 10,000 chips, the cost of electricity to power them is a massive ongoing expense. Making each chip do more work per watt of electricity is not just nice to have, it is financially critical. This background gave Bolt a very different set of priorities and a very different design philosophy compared to Nvidia. Nvidia optimizes for gaming performance using a design approach that has evolved gradually over decades. Bolt optimized for computational throughput and energy efficiency using an approach developed specifically for AI workloads. When they decided to build a gaming GPU, they did not adopt Nvidia's design philosophy. They applied their own, and the results proved that their approach was dramatically better suited for the most demanding workloads in modern gaming. The chip design at the heart of the Zeus is called a chiplet mesh architecture. Instead of building one very large chip that contains everything, Bolt builds many small chips and connects them together in a carefully designed network pattern. Each small chip handles a portion of the total computing work. The chips communicate with each other through high-speed connections that Bolt developed over years of building AI hardware, where inter-chip communication at extreme speeds was a critical requirement. This approach solves several problems at once that have been limiting the performance and value of traditional single-chip GPU designs. Making one very large chip is expensive because large chips are more likely to have manufacturing defects. A tiny flaw anywhere on a large chip makes the whole chip unusable. Manufacturers have to produce many chips and throw away the ones with defects, and that waste gets built into the price. Small chips have far fewer defects. Almost every one that comes off the production line is usable. Less waste means lower manufacturing cost, and lower manufacturing cost is how Bolt can sell a dramatically better performing card for less money. Large chips also concentrate enormous amounts of heat in one area. Managing that heat requires complex and expensive cooling solutions. The Zeus distributes its computing work across many chiplets, which also distributes the heat. Spread out heat is far easier to manage than concentrated heat. The Zeus runs cooler during long gaming sessions, which means it throttles less and maintains its peak performance more consistently over extended play. The memory design of the Zeus benefits from the chiplet approach in a way that directly addresses one of the most complained about aspects of Nvidia's recent cards. Because memory is distributed across multiple chiplets, rather than all connected to one central chip, the total memory bandwidth scales with the number of chiplets. The Zeus has access to far more VRAM than the RTX 5090, and can move data in and out of that memory at significantly higher speeds. In path tracing, which requires constant access to enormous amounts of scene data, this memory advantage translates directly into the performance gap that shows up in benchmarks. The performance numbers from Zeus testing have been discussed widely, but it is worth going through them carefully in plain language, because the full picture is even more impressive than the headline 5 times figure suggests. In path tracing benchmarks, the Zeus scores 5 times higher than the RTX 5090. Path tracing is the technology that makes games look like real photographs by simulating how light actually travels and bounces around the scene. Every shadow, every reflection, every subtle glow of light filling a room gets calculated accurately instead of being approximated with shortcuts. The result is the most beautiful game visuals that have ever been possible. The catch has always been that path tracing requires enormous computing power, so much that even the RTX 5090 struggles to run it smoothly at high resolutions. What the 5 times figure means in practical gaming terms is this: a game running at 45 frames per second on the RTX 5090 with full path tracing, enabled at 4K resolution, runs at over 200 frames per second on the Zeus at exactly the same settings. 45 frames per second is playable, but it does not feel smooth in the way that 60, 90, or 120 frames per second does. 200 frames per second is an entirely different experience. Everything feels immediate and responsive. Fast. Movements look clean. The game world feels alive and real in a way that lower frame rates simply cannot deliver. Path tracing at this frame rate with this visual quality has never been accessible to any consumer before the Zeus. It is a genuinely new experience that the most expensive previous hardware could not provide. In ray tracing benchmarks, which test a less extreme but still very demanding version of realistic lighting, the Zeus scores about 2.5 times higher than the RTX 5090. Ray tracing was one of the main selling points of Nvidia's recent cards, and something Nvidia invested heavily in promoting. The Zeus makes ray tracing look effortless in situations where the 5090 still has to work hard. In standard gaming benchmarks without any ray tracing or path tracing, the Zeus is still approximately twice as fast as the RTX 5090. Games that run at 120 frames per second on the 5090 run at around 240 on the Zeus. For competitive gamers using high refresh rate monitors, those extra frames are directly useful. The difference between 120 and 240 frames per second is something skilled players can feel in how quickly their actions register on screen. Power consumption testing produced results that surprised many reviewers. The Zeus, despite performing 5 times better in path tracing, uses similar amounts of power to the RTX 5090 in many tests, and in some specifically targeted path tracing scenarios actually uses slightly less. Delivering 5 times the computational output for the same or lower power draw is the kind of efficiency improvement that comes from rethinking design fundamentals rather than simply improving an existing approach. This is Bolt's AI computing background, showing up directly in how their hardware behaves. The price of the Zeus, at roughly half the cost of the RTX 5090, deserves careful examination because it is one of the most important parts of this story, and it changes the entire logic of how buyers should think about the high-end graphics card market. $2,000 for the RTX 5090 was Nvidia's price for the best. It was high, but it was defensible because nothing better existed. When you're buying the fastest card in the world, the price is what the price is. Buyers either accepted it or waited for something more affordable, knowing they were giving up a significant amount of performance by doing so. The Zeus changes this calculation completely. The best card in the world now costs half of what the previous best card cost. The price difference between buying the best and buying something significantly less capable has collapsed. Before the Zeus, spending $2,000 got you the best, and spending $1,000 got you significantly less. Now spending around $1,000 or less gets you something far better than the old $2,000 card. This is not just good news for people who were already planning to spend $2,000. It is good news for everyone who games on a PC. The value of hardware at every price point is determined partly by what the top of the market looks like. When the top of the market delivers dramatically more for dramatically less money, it creates pressure on all the cards below it to offer better value too. Mid-range cards that seemed reasonably priced a month ago start looking expensive. When the performance ceiling has been reset so dramatically upward, prices across the whole market will adjust in response to what Bolt has done. Thinking about the pure mathematics of value makes the decision between the Zeus and the 5090 almost impossibly one-sided. If you spend $2,000 on an RTX 5090, every dollar buys you a certain level of performance. If you spend $1,000 on a Zeus, every dollar buys you roughly 5 times more path tracing performance. You're spending half as much money and getting something dramatically better. Even if your priority is something other than path tracing and the performance advantage is smaller in your specific use case, the Zeus still wins the value comparison decisively in virtually every scenario. The honest questions about the Zeus deserve honest answers, because spending significant money on a graphics card requires complete information, not just the exciting headline numbers. The driver software situation is the most important thing to understand clearly. Drivers are the programs that make a graphics card work properly with games, operating systems, and all the other software on your computer. Has been writing and refining their graphics drivers for many years. They release regular updates. They have dedicated teams that work with major game developers before release to ensure their cards work well with new titles, and their drivers have been tested by millions of users across thousands of different hardware configurations. This maturity and reliability is a genuine advantage that comes only from years of being in the market. Bolt is new to consumer graphics cards. Their drivers are functional and the core gaming experience works well, but they are not as mature as Nvidia's. Some games may have minor issues. A visual artifact here, a slightly lower frame rate than expected there, an occasional crash in a title that was not specifically tested before launch. These are real possibilities, and buyers should know about them. Bolt is actively working on driver improvements and releasing updates regularly. The situation will improve substantially over the first 6 to 12 months as more users report issues and Bolt addresses them. But in the period immediately after launch, the driver experience will not be as polished as what Nvidia offers. This concern is real, but it should be kept in proportion. Every graphics card company, including Nvidia, has had driver issues at various points. The RTX 5090 itself had early driver problems that Nvidia fixed over time. The question is not whether a new product has early software issues. Every product does. The question is how quickly and how seriously the company responds. Bolt has responded to early user feedback faster than many expected, which is an encouraging sign. Game compatibility is related to drivers, but slightly different. Games are developed and tested predominantly on Nvidia and AMD hardware because those cards are what most developers own and what most players use. When a developer tests their game before releasing it, they're not testing it on Zeus hardware because almost nobody owns Zeus hardware yet. This means some games may have problems on the Zeus that simply were not caught because nobody tested them on this hardware before release. These problems get discovered and fixed after launch as Zeus owners play through games and report issues. The library of games that works perfectly on the Zeus will grow steadily over time, but at launch, it will not be as comprehensively tested as Nvidia's compatibility list. Long-term support is another legitimate consideration. A graphics card is typically used for 3 to 5 years. Buyers want confidence that the company behind their card will continue releasing driver updates, optimizing for new games, and supporting the hardware throughout its useful life. Nvidia has demonstrated this kind of long-term commitment repeatedly over many product generations. Bolt has not yet had the opportunity to prove their long-term commitment simply because their products have not been in the market long enough, based on their public statements and their track record in AI computing hardware where long-term support is standard. The indications are positive. But buyers who weigh this factor heavily have a reasonable basis for some caution. Nvidia's response to the Zeus is something that every gamer should watch carefully because it will directly affect what is available to buy and at what price in the coming months. A company as large, well-resourced, and technically capable as Nvidia does not lose the top performance position in their core market without mounting a serious response. Price adjustments are the first and most immediate response that is likely to happen. The RTX 5090 at $2,000 is extremely difficult to justify to buyers who know the Zeus exists. Nvidia will reduce the price. The question is by how much and how quickly. If the Zeus establishes itself quickly, with strong review scores and healthy sales, Nvidia will be forced to cut prices more aggressively. If the Zeus faces early challenges with driver issues that create negative press, Nvidia may feel less immediate pressure. Watching how the competitive dynamics play out over the first few months after the Zeus launch will tell us a lot about how deep Nvidia's price reductions will go. New product announcements from Nvidia will come sooner than originally planned. When a competitor leapfrogs you in performance, the natural response is to accelerate development of the next generation. Whatever Nvidia had planned for their next architecture, the Zeus, gives them a very strong motivation to release it faster. Earlier availability of next-generation Nvidia hardware is good for the whole market because it means buyers have better options sooner. Nvidia's software ecosystem will be used as a competitive moat more aggressively than before. DLSS, Nvidia Reflex, deep game developer relationships, and the maturity of Nvidia's drivers are all genuine advantages that Bolt cannot match on day one. Nvidia will lean into these advantages hard in their marketing and in their conversations with game developers. They will try to make the software ecosystem argument compelling enough to keep buyers choosing Nvidia even when the hardware numbers favor Bolt. Whether this strategy succeeds depends on how quickly Bolt's software matures and how much buyers actually care about software features versus raw performance and price. For the gamer sitting at home right now trying to make a smart decision about their next graphics card purchase, the advice is clear and it does not require complicated analysis. If you are about to buy an RTX 5090, do not do it yet. Wait for independent reviews of the Zeus from people with no connection to Bolt. These reviews will test the card across hundreds of games in real-world conditions and tell you the full, honest picture, including any areas where the Zeus falls short. If the reviews confirm the benchmark numbers, and early indications strongly suggest they will, spending $2,000 on the 5090 when the Zeus exists would be one of the least sensible hardware purchases you could make. If you want to buy a Zeus and experience the fastest gaming GPU in the world at half the price of what used to be the fastest, the performance will be extraordinary. Be ready for driver updates and the small possibility of issues in some games during the first few months. If you are comfortable with that, you will have hardware that no other consumer card can match. If you already own an RTX 5090, there's no reason to panic. Your card still does everything it did when you bought it. It is still a very capable piece of hardware that will run games well for years. The Zeus being faster does not make the 5090 stop working. It just means the market moved quickly, which happens in technology. If you are buying in the mid-range and a Zeus is not in your budget, watch prices over the next 3 to 6 months. Competition at the top pushes prices down at every level. Cards that seem expensive today may become significantly more affordable as Nvidia, AMD, and now Bolt compete for every segment of the market. The RTX 5090 was the best consumer graphics card in the world. It held that title fairly and deserved the respect it received from reviewers and buyers. But the best anything in a technology market is always a temporary title. Better things are always being built somewhere, and when they arrive, the previous champion has to accept its new position. The Bolt Zeus GPU has arrived. It is 5 times faster at path tracing. It costs half as much. It runs cooler. It is more efficient. It has more memory. It delivers an experience, specifically the experience of playing games with full path tracing at high resolution and genuinely smooth frame rates that no previous consumer hardware could provide. This is not incremental progress. This is a leap, the kind that happens rarely and that changes the market permanently when it does. The RTX 5090 is not literally dead. It will still sell to buyers who prioritize Nvidia's software ecosystem, who want guaranteed compatibility, or who simply distrust new companies. These are all legitimate reasons to choose Nvidia, and they will keep the 5090 relevant for some buyers. But its position as the card to buy for anyone who wants the best performance for their money is gone. That position now belongs to something faster and cheaper, and no amount of marketing will change that fact. The GPU market has a new king. It got there through genuine engineering innovation, rather than incremental improvement of an existing approach. And for gamers who have been waiting years for prices to come down and performance to go up in a meaningful way, the Bolt Zeus is the answer they were looking for. It was worth the wait.